Stormtroopers, scary evil droids, outnumbered protagonists set against the evil empire, spacecraft, alien races, frenetic fights, and a distinctive soundtrack. Instantly recognizable hallmarks of Star Wars, and except for the lightsabers, Dark Forces has them all. In this instance, did Star Warsiness cranked up to 11 turn a good game into a better one? Let's find out. So how did it all begin? Even though LucasArts' Dark Forces definitely is among the pioneers of first-person shooters, its release date in the March of 1995 can be considered both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it was still among the groundbreakers of the genre suddenly exploding in popularity, and a curse because it was launched hardly a year after Doom and there was no way it could avoid the unfortunate label of a Doom clone. Apart from them both being pure-blooded first-person shooters, similarities between Doom and Dark Forces are actually quite scarce. Whereas Doom is an adrenaline-filled slaughterhouse with non-stop action, gloom and never-ending struggle to survive its horror setting, Dark Forces is mission-oriented, with various goals, puzzles, an underlying plot binding the levels together, and a more tactical approach. Which is not to say it is therefore better or worse, it is just different. Hence its Doom clone moniker, which was not uncommon in the media at the time, misses the point by quite some distance, akin to saying the piano is an organ clone. So no zombies and no giblets in Dark Forces, but what does it offer instead? The plot revolves around the Galactic Empire developing a new, frighteningly powerful type of battle droids, the Dark Troopers. Having suffered a devastating attack by them, the Rebel Alliance quickly realizes its further existence will be very much in doubt should the Empire succeed at completing their development program and ramping up their Dark Troopers manufacturing capacity. They quickly hire a resourceful former Imperial officer and now a mercenary Kyle Katarn to investigate the matter and put a stop to the Dark Trooper program by any means. This plot is woven through 13 levels, with an unrelated 14th one serving as a prologue happening a few years before the main storyline. Altogether, they include all the well-known level types. There's one taking place in the ruins, another one in the sewers, the one in a mine, then there is one where you need to rescue a prisoner, the one in a frozen world, one in a sleazy smuggler city, the one where you got captured and have to recover all your weapons, one where you infiltrate a maximum security area, one where you hijack a spaceship, as well as the one where you get to blow everything up and escape, having just defeated the ultimate boss. Sounds generic. From the modern standpoint, perhaps. But back then in 1995 such variation was a novelty, and one should commend the creators for putting together a storyline that actually manages to explain why would the protagonist need to visit so vastly different locations and complete various objectives on the way. They typically require a player to collect an item, operate some clearly identifiable control panel or a switch, or reach a specific area. Interestingly, there are only a few spots in the game where the player needs to actually kill a specific enemy in order to continue and complete the level. Level design is a mercilessly limiting factor of first-person shooters. Excellent level design as such is no guarantee for a great game, but no game can ever ascend to a legendary status with mediocre levels. In this respect, Dark Forces hits a high mark, and the only obstacle barring it from becoming a textbook example of perfect level design of the era are its occasional slips. Surely, most of the level structure is brilliant, packed with atmospheric views and architectural masterpieces that obviously require tons of care, thought and inspiration, as well as ingenuity working around the limitations of the game's 2.5D rather than a full 3D engine. But then, from time to time, One stumbles across rooms with no doors, encounters enemies emerging from their tiny closets, as well as those poor souls who were forgotten during construction and had to spend the rest of their lives confined to the balconies they could never leave. There are also prison cells conveniently right next to the docked escape ship, unnecessarily squiggly sewer canals, and areas mere meters away which require a 100-kilometer detour to actually reach on foot. Not really something an architect would boast with in their CV. But back to the positives. Good game design is rarely about abundance. Rather, it's about balance, about finding that sweet spot between various gameplay elements. And this subtle but important balancing act is what Dark Forces does rather well. The game is primarily a shooter, of course, but it rarely overwhelms the player with pure fighting. Most levels provide the opportunities to cool the weapon down while jumping through the platformer sections, exploring and searching for secrets, or solving puzzles. Speaking of which, the puzzles are moderate and don't require the intellect of Athena to solve. They're only complex enough to ensure one cannot solve them by bashing the switches randomly. There is only a single exception, a puzzle in the 11th level, which actually requires a deeper thought, but still nothing that would baffle a future Jedi Knight for long. Same can be said about occasional platforming. It's not that hard, and only at mercifully few places is it really unavoidable, which is, in this context, a good thing. Kyle Katarn is on a dead serious mission to eliminate a grave threat to the rebellion's very existence, so having to hop around like Super Mario collecting coins would quickly dispel the dark atmosphere the game strives to present. But even the best level design is just a foundation for something more important: solid gameplay. In shooters, a large share of good gameplay depends on a set of wisely designed enemies. For Dark Forces, its strict Star Wars setting must have presented a considerable limitation. Stormtroopers, officers, droids, and a few famous alien races all simply had to be there. Likewise, devoted audience would hardly accept anything new that feels wrong in the Star Wars universe. Most of the time, Dark Forces slaloms through these harsh constraints with competence. Stormtroopers and officers are present indeed, and along with the commandos serve as the basic bread and butter enemies, abundant in 10 out of 14 levels. For some more variety, the Empire fields a few types of droids and probes, as well as the devastatingly powerful turrets. In other levels, namely those outside the strictly Imperial context, Kyle Katarn fights several alien races, most of which are actually trickier to beat than the Imperial human cannon fodder, and require defter footwork, as well as better marksmanship. But it is the occasional Dark Troopers that provide the hardest challenge. There is only one in the first half of the game, whereas throughout the second half they gradually become less uncommon. Even though the Dark Trooper Phase 2 is depicted as more dangerous with its jetpack, devastating plasma cannon and missile launcher, the Phase 1 is arguably scarier. It is the archetype of a fast, powerful melee assassin, tough to defeat with any weapon, and willing to slice your full health down to zero with horrific enthusiasm. Especially in confined spaces, its robotic shriek as it spots you is the last thing you want to hear. Which LucasArts was aware of, so you will be occasionally hearing it. One of the elements set in your favor is the enemy's intelligence, or rather the lack of it. Remember, we are still in the middle 1990s, when processing power was a rare and highly precious resource, and when the CPU had to also deal with all the graphics, meaning that any smarter enemies would have taken an unacceptable toll on the overall performance. With their simple follow and fire on sight tactics, from today's perspective the enemy's intelligence seems inferior to that of an electric kettle. Yet facing a 486 processor already burdened with a million other tasks, developers at the time simply did not have much of a choice. However, the game designers largely compensated for it with clever enemy placement. With many ambushes, groups and triggered events, fighting them is still no spring picnic, even though the traditional tactics like exploiting choke points and sniping from distance still largely work. As far as weapons are concerned, if you expected a Star Wars first-person shooter to rely heavily on the iconic E11 blaster rifle, you were right, it does. Perhaps it does even a bit too much. Due to its balance of power, high rate of fire, abundance of ammunition, and efficacy at short to medium distances, you are guaranteed to spend the overwhelming majority of the first half of the game wielding it, only occasionally switching to a pistol or thermal detonators. Even in the later stages, the fact that the energy units for the blaster remain the only widely available ammunition implies its inevitable heavy use. For those reasons, but not only for those, weapons are possibly the weakest element of Dark Forces, although there is as many as 9 of them, the 10th being fists. Sure, the aforementioned thermal detonators are both fun and useful, they bounce off walls, they can be used to great tactical advantage, and pack quite a punch. There's also the awesome Stalker concussion rifle, an excellent medium to long range weapon capable of mowing down hordes of Imperials. But again, it is only a minority of levels where the ammunition for these weapons is abundant enough to actually use them primarily. But it's not just about disbalanced armament. Speaking of missed opportunities, even though the general gameplay is good, there are several other existing gameplay elements with enormous potential the game could have benefited from had they been taken full advantage of. In darkness, most enemies cannot see you, and with dynamic lighting already present in the game, it would have been easy to introduce a section where the player could, with some effort, turn the lights off and conveniently stroll through using the night vision goggles. Furthermore, standing enemies don't see behind themselves, which actually offers such an obvious potential for sections that reward successful sneaking behind their backs. But the game has only one such obvious spot, and even that one suggests destruction rather than discretion. There are other examples. The game's scripting system supports detecting explosions and implementing destructible environment, but it got used only for a couple of secret doors. It would also have probably been easy to add a civilian NPC logic and enliven the Nar Shaddaa spaceport, which one would expect to be full of neutral civilians. But to be fair, lots of attractive features were taken advantage of. There's a floating island shuttle, poisonous gas, conveyor belts and water streams, toxic chemicals, full 3D models, atmospheric effects, deflecting shots, rotating bridges, force fields, a live multi-layer map, proximity mines, shootable switches, a PDA with a full inventory system, a headlight and infrared goggles, arcade-style crushers, great soundtracks actively following the atmosphere, environmental sounds, cutscenes between the levels, a clever and flexible scripting logic, and several weapons offering a secondary fire mode. So altogether, there is much to enjoy. No shortage of bells and whistles, especially considering the limitations of the hardware the game was designed to run on. But with or without bells and whistles, how does the game feel? Contrary to shooters, where the only goal is to survive, each level in Dark Forces is preceded by a written briefing, most often by Kyle Katarn's trusted mission officer Jan Ors. This helps the game build an atmosphere of focus and purpose, and lets one immerse into the plot. That is something LucasArts always did masterfully. TIE Fighter, the game from the same era, was particularly praised for its deeply immersive briefings. As for the plot of Dark Forces itself, it is refreshingly profane and grounded. Its Star Wars setting could have produced all kinds of special plot devices involving the Force, secrets of the Jedi, the Dark Lord himself, uncovering obscure family ties, joining secret societies, and such. But there is none of that here. Kyle Katarn is pursuing very sober and pragmatic goals, stealing artifacts, blowing up facilities and ships, apprehending antagonists and rescuing friends, all while trying to put an end to the Imperial Dark Trooper program. He's not one to shy away from getting his hands dirty in the field. And to my mind at least, that was a good choice, since it leads to a more gritty game, avoiding the path of least resistance, avoiding dramatic one-liners in lavish palaces and replacing them with swimming through sewage and roaming decrepit city of smugglers and shady traders. Even the primary antagonist in the game is no wielder of secret supernatural powers, but just an ambitious human general who happens to have an exoskeleton built for him and is defeated using perfectly regular means. Yet once or twice, things go a little too far for my taste. In the 11th level, not only do Katarn and Jan manage to fool the entire Imperial airspace security and actually land right into the Imperial capital of Coruscant, but Katarn then proceeds to single-handedly defeat the forces guarding the Imperial Security Operations building, likely the most secure building in the galaxy, then crack the main vault alone and escape with all his limbs attached. Another example has Katarn plays a secret transmitter aboard a ship to track its movements, having just killed everyone aboard. Surprisingly, even though his later depictions firmly define him as a highly positive and thoughtful character, in Dark Forces, Kyle Katarn is portrayed as a considerable jerk. When a rebel senator shakenly begs him to accept the extremely dangerous mission whose outcome could save millions of civilian lives, this is his historically chivalrous answer.
This could be interesting.
It is not a singular incident. Later in the game, he is once more depicted as one of those obnoxious characters that threaten holograms with empty threats when facing imminent own death. If the intention was to portray Katarn as both unbelievably cool and fiercely protective of his colleagues, these scenes only succeed in depicting him as an unwise idiot. Or perhaps the intention was to point out that in large conflicts there is rarely a belligerent consisting only of angels. War is war, and even the good side sometimes has to employ forces with questionable moral integrity. If that was the idea, the game makes a commendably deep point, but it is a massive deviation from the usual Star Wars scenes where the good and the bad characters are cartoonishly easy to discern. Another element the game envelops you with is its unmistakable Star Wars aesthetic. Almost every detail of Dark Forces dissipates the essence of Star Wars towards your ears and eyes. Textures, artwork, architecture, soundtrack, and the occasional cutscenes all carry very distinct signatures of the franchise. But even if you're not a fan of Star Wars, the game can still be enjoyed as a solid first-person shooter, and it can be enjoyed more than once. To wit, even though the enemy and item placement, as well as the level geometry are static, it is rather the variety of environments and the tactical flexibility that keep the game fresh. It lets you adopt various fighting styles, so if you have just finished it with the Western-style reckless saloon shootout approach, you can retry it as a patient sniper, and then once more as an explosives specialist. Furthermore, the game is full of interesting little details that are easy to miss and which you will likely spot only in the more carefree second or third playthrough. Of course, for the more daring, there are various challenges like finishing the game on hard difficulty without losing a life, or by using nothing but the E11. One brave Australian member of the game community recently managed to complete the game without ever picking up any weapon, including the enemy drops. It wasn't long since the game's release when its early fans discovered that the file formats it uses for the main resources aren't difficult to decode and disassemble. Coupled with the option of the game executable to load a custom resource file, this gradually led to a spectrum of various tools and editors made by the community, a few of which I admit being guilty of myself. Of course, over the years, these in turn led to a respectable number of custom levels for Dark Forces, many of which challenge, some match, and a select few even surpass the original ones by squeezing the very last bits of power from the game engine. Sure, their number cannot match those of the more famous Doom or Duke Nukem 3D, but still, even if you picked only the absolute best of what the community made, you would still get the playtime of at least double the original campaign. As is typically the case, the community was at its peak during the first few years after the game's release and dwindled later. but thanks to a small group of dedicated people who renewed the community portal and gathered the old fans, the community has seen a surprising resurgence, with new levels, new tools, and even newly discovered knowledge of the game's intricate internal mechanics. 3 items are of particular note. Firstly, the recently released TFE, the Force engine, which is a full reconstruction of the game engine using new technologies and expanding on what the original could do. Secondly, the community patch, which fixes and improves tons of oversights and details from the original game. And thirdly, the mouse look enabler, which does exactly what it says. Remember, Dark Forces was developed at the time when keyboard was considered the primary input device, with mouse being merely something to click through the menus with. More recently, the game also got its remaster with improved artwork, which may be your cup of tea or may not. Dark Forces sold well, breaking ground for a lineage of sequels, first of which was the Jedi Knight in late 1997. It's a good game as well, and it's further sequels too, but it is Dark Forces that holds the esteemed title of a progenitor. The initial chip LucasArts audaciously put on the early, emerging table of first-person shooters. Kyle Katarn, the ultimate problem solver. Single-handedly defeating half of the Empire. Punching a herd of Kel dragons to death. Displacing planets from their orbits. Slaloming between the ships even when just leaving their formation plane would have been enough. Katarn doesn't really care whether the Force is with him or not, it is rather the Force that hopes to have Katarn on its side. Thank you for watching, and if this video looks like it was inspired by a particular well-known creator, well, it was. Go watch his work. But first visit the Dark Forces community portal, of course. If you don't, may the remorse be with you.